disruptive.
Weird thing to happen. Here's some big news for you, ladies and gentlemen. Pierre Poilievre is calling for the federal government to end the temporary foreign worker program. This is something that has been addressed for years now with Justin Trudeau, that we know that the migrant crisis plays a huge factor into the abuse that corporations are exploiting workers for cheap labor. And this has been addressed numerous times, and people, instantly go on to an attack to say, oh, you're demonizing foreign workers, you're demonizing immigrants, you're racist, you're xenophobic, and they try to downplay the real abuse of all this. And whereas I would say, I'm not angry at the foreigner for, getting a job and trying to survive in this crazy world. They're just like you and I. I'm angry at the fact that our governments are purposely exploiting and undermining Canadian workers purposely to get foreign workers for cheap labor. And this is part of that temporary foreign worker program that now Pierre Poilievre is finally addressing. Pierre Poilievre made hints here and there, but never gone to the lengths of this. So it goes on to say, this is from the Globe and Mail, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is calling on the federal government to shut down the temporary foreign worker program and immediately end the issue of new permits, linking it to the rising youth unemployment and saying it is flooding the job market with cheap labor. The Conservatives are proposing the creation of a separate standalone program for difficult-to-fill agricultural labor and to wind down the program gradually in regions with low unemployment rates. Why aren't employers offering jobs to Canadian kids first? Why are they shutting down our own youth out of jobs and replacing them with low-wage labor? Mr. Poilievre told reporters at a news conference in Mississauga on Wednesday morning. We know why a foreign-owned mega chain wants to be greedy. It's good for their corporate profits. But our immigration system doesn't exist to pad their bottom line, he said. That's why the government should immediately stop issuing new TFW, that's temporary foreign worker permits, and end this wage-suppressing, opportunity-stealing program. The TFW program has been dodged by a controversy for decades, largely owing to allegations of worker abuse by employers, but it is a key immigration stream in Canada and heavily used by agricultural employers and large retail and restaurant chains to fill a shortage of domestic labor. So this is the argument that corporations have been using for years, that they claim that we need to bring in more and more people into the country, undocumented, unaccountable, this mass migration of people, because there aren't enough people in Canada to work. Nobody wants to work anymore. That's the claim that they're making, which is the absolute opposite. It's the absolute opposite. Canadians want to work. Canadians are desperate for work. It's that corporations don't want to actually pay and treat their employees like actual people. And because they want to find and cut costs at every itch end, they're going to extort their abuses, their atrocities, to try to undermine Canadian workforce to go and scavenge for cheaper labor. This is how they're insourcing labor. It used to be that they would have to send the company to another country. That was called outsourcing. Now they're insourcing labor. And it's affecting our immigration stature. It's affecting cities and towns that now we're getting an influx of a population that we did not need, these foreign workers to fulfill these jobs, to fill different areas. And now it's running amok because we can't control it. We don't have any means to hold it accountable because the corporations that exploit and abuse this have our government in capture to keep this going. So here is a little chart here. This is from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. So this is their own chart here. And you can see it was kind of low. It kind of took off around, that's 2008, 2009 area. Keeps going, kind of took a little bit in 2014. And then all of a sudden, look, after 2020, look what happened when we were told to lock everything down, that restaurants were supposed to shut down, that businesses, mom and pop stores, they were supposed to shut down. Look how much it increased in that time. Look how much it increased. While everyone was told to shut down, hunker down, that you're going to be out of work for a while because of a pandemic, they brought in foreign migrants to replace the workers that they claimed that there was a shortage of because they laid everyone off during the pandemic. So this is the kind of abuse that I talk about. It's not the foreigners themselves. It's not being, racist or xenophobic. It's about the exploitation that comes out of the government and why this is such a big deal. The government determines if employers are eligible to hire foreign labor by evaluating a labor market impact assessment applications, a document employers fill in to justify whether they're unable to find local workers for the job. During the height of the pandemic, the government expanded access to its program, resulting in a soaring number of LMIA approvals between 2022 and 2024. Again, after they told people, they lied to you, that they had to do mass layoffs because of the pandemic, because of the virus. They told you had to lose your job. 7 out of 10 small businesses in Toronto alone were forcibly shut down and ceased to exist. And then the government went behind your back and opened the floodgates to bringing more migrants to replace those workers. Do you kind of see where the notion of the great replacement theory comes in? I know people like to assume that's a, Tucker Carlson race baiting issue, but you can see here, they purposely undermined Canadian workers, drove them out. They used the pandemic as an excuse to drive them out because, we can't operate because it's unsafe during the virus. And then bring in a bunch of migrants from different countries and communities that possibly be bombed and destroyed and ruin their country, forcing them to come into Canada to seek refuge. And then all of a sudden, they start working in our industries. They start working for the jobs that were fulfilled at one point by actual legitimate Canadians. So this is corporate exploitation to the bone. And a lot of these records have been proven as false claims, that they're falsifying these documents that, we can't find any, workers out there. Nobody wants to work. So obviously we got to bring in someone that I can exploit for cheap labor. Federal government data show that in the first half of 2025, 105,195 new work permits and extensions to work permits were issued to workers entering Canada through the TFW program. By contrast, in 2024, there were more than 191,000 permits issued. And in 2023, there were approximately 183,000 permits issued. In a statement to the Globe and Mail, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada said that the 105,000 permits, the 33,000 were for new workers entering Canada, roughly 40% of the total volume expected. The Liberal government has targeted capping the number of new TFW entries at 82,000 in 2025. At the Liberal Party's cabinet retreat in Toronto, Prime Minister Mark Carney emphasized that the TFW program has a role to play in the economy. He said the government remains committed to reducing the proportion of temporary residents relative to the population, but noted that businesses are keen to have access to temporary foreign workers. So Mark Carney is still defending the scheme. He's still defending the scheme. And if you remember a video we did about the immigration minister, Mark Miller, under Justin Trudeau, Mark Miller claimed that the reason we had to do this was to save the Canadian economy from recession. That because everything was shut down during the pandemic, we had to resort to bring in people to replace the labor so that Canada would not fall into a recession. But guess what? We've done this for a couple of years now, and Canada's even worse shape than the pandemic. Worse than we were a couple of years ago. The recession is getting worse. It's not saving the country. Mark Carney says, when I talk to the businesses around the country, particularly in Quebec, but elsewhere in the country, their number one issue is tariffs. And their number two issue is access to temporary foreign workers. That's their biggest priority, the tariffs and how to find cheap labor. Not how can I make the country that I am and find a reliable workforce to generate revenue that Canadians can actually purchase my product. Not anything like that. But how do I find cheap labor and how do I avoid the cost of tariffs, which eventually go into you? You are paying for the tariffs, despite what people say. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business, a small business lobby group, condemned Mr. Poilievre's proposal to scrap the program, saying that there were 0 employers of entry-level workers who used the program for cheap labor. You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. Have you been to a Tim Hortons? Have you been to a Burger King? Have you been to Starbucks? Have you been to Zehrs? Have you been to Sobeys? Have you been to anywhere? There's a reason why there's a mass unemployment rate, particularly among the youth. Because entry-level jobs that teenagers used to get during the summer months so they could save up some money, maybe, save that for college or they can use it for their own means, went to temporary foreign workers, temporary foreign labor. There's a reason for that. And the Federation of Independent Business is claiming that, there's not a chance in hell that would happen. So they're also covering this scheme, probably because they're bought out by these corporations purposely undermining and exploiting the workforce, undermining Canadian workers to hire a bunch of migrant workers for cheap labor. And we see this a lot, not just in Canada, but with the United States, with England, with elsewhere around the world, because that's how the globalist capitalist empire is operating at this point. They are trying to find a means to undermine the cost of labor by purposely exploiting countries and finding cheap labor by any means necessary, even if it goes against every single action of said country. The fact that we have a huge amount of pouring in of illegitimate migrants that are illegal, that they came into this country, that we have no documentation, no accountability for. But companies like Tim Hortons and Burger King and Starbucks and elsewhere are scooping them up for cheap labor is a problem. That's why Pierre Poilievre is addressing this. So here's him saying this in the campaign, in a press room in Mississauga here. And here's him addressing why we need to close down the temporary foreign worker program, because it's completely corrupted.
Well, in most cases, I don't think they do need temporary foreign workers. I think they hire them because they can pay them less. And it's that simple. They don't want to pay the prevailing wage to the Canadian worker. And so they hire someone from abroad who might be in a desperate situation and willing to take less. And we see it again. Michelle Rempel has been tweeting out these job postings. I think was it Booster Juice, the one you came out with yesterday? $36 an hour. They're Booster Juice offering $36 an hour to a temporary foreign worker. They specifically say they want it to be a temporary foreign worker. Why aren't they offering those jobs to Canadian kids first? And I'm not now speaking about any particular employer, but we know that there's a lot of abuse in this system, where the employers are asking for some of the wage back from their worker. I'm not alleging that for Booster Juice, but it is happening out there. It is a very exploitative system that has allowed corporate elites to profit off of driving wages down and driving jobs out. And we're going to put an end to it.
You know, it's crazy that those words, that statement there, telling people that we need to close down the loopholes and uncover the scam that the corporate it very much sounds like a lefty position, doesn't it? Like, I'm surprised this is coming from the Conservative Party of Canada. The Conservative Party wants to go after corporate elites that exploit the system, undermine workers and their wages for cheap labor. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, that's supposed to be a lefty position. That's supposed to be, like a Marxist socialist proposition. Hey, we're going to help the workers. But the Liberal Party isn't doing that. The NDP Party isn't doing that. The Green Party isn't even doing that. Pierre Poilievre seems to be the only one mentioning about it. Wow. That's talk about a twist there. The Conservative Party of Canada is making a statement that very much sounds like some sort of socialist left-wing position. That used to be the case. That used to be, a part of, building up unions, and used to be, part of democratizing the workforce. That's what used to be considered left. But in Canada, the tables have turned. Now a lefty is one that bows to the corporate elites, bows to the establishment, bows to the dominant force of the WEF. And surprisingly, a guy like Pierre Poilievre, who has a lot of flaws, I'm not, giving him full credit on this, but he's making a statement about supporting the workers. It seems so crazy that we live in these times. And not only did Pierre Poilievre say that, but here's Justin Trudeau saying back in 2014, before he was elected prime minister, he said that the Conservative Party temporary foreign worker program lowers Canadian wages and exploits vulnerable people. It needs to be fixed. So he was mentioning that under Stephen Harper, who was the Conservative prime minister before Justin Trudeau, that he was abusing the temporary foreign worker program because his donors, because the corporations that funnel money into his campaign and to his party were purposely undermining Canadian workers and pushing legislation to get cheap labor. And Justin Trudeau made the promise that if he gets elected, he was going to put an end to it. But guess what? Under Justin Trudeau, that temporary foreign worker abuse exploded. And it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And Mark Carney doing the same thing. Hey, we're going to put a cap on this, and we're going to stop and put a pause on the amount of mass migration to exploit workers. We're going to put an end to it. Guess what? It never happened. Because the corporations, the donor class, the people that truly run this country have occupied the Parliament building and the people within the Parliament building to change the legislation in their favor. They want to keep this scam afloat as much as possible. So as much as I would love to hear Pierre Poilievre mentioning details of how exploitive the temporary foreign worker program is, it's hard to break this chain and break this scheme because it's so just diluted into the very political system within this country. As you can see here, it wasn't just Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney. It was also with Stephen Harper. They've been doing this for quite an extensive, long period, folks. And now today, to Mark Carney, because he was asked what he thought about Pierre Poilievre's remarks, and Juno News says, asked about Pierre Poilievre's demand that the temporary foreign worker program be scrapped, Mark Carney defends the scheme, saying businesses tell him they need the temporary foreign workers. Yes, they need the temporary foreign workers. Nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to work. This unemployment crisis that's happening right now, oh, it's just laziness. Everyone's just so lazy. That's why we need to bring in migrants from other countries and exploit our country and our workforce for cheap labor because everyone else is lazy. That's the excuse that corporations like to make. But here's Mark Carney defending that scheme.
Mr. Poilievre called this morning on the government to scrap the temporary foreign worker program. Is it time to shut the program down?
Well, I would say the following, which is that that program has a role. It has to be focused in terms of its role. And it's part of what we're reviewing. It's part of what we will be discussing, how well the temporary foreign worker program is working and how our overall immigration system is working. When I talk to businesses around the country, particularly in Quebec, but elsewhere across the country, their number one issue is tariffs, and their number two issue is access to temporary foreign workers.
Mr. Poilievre called this morning on the government to...
So he just told the reporter there that, oh yeah, he's talked to a lot of different businesses and they have two top priorities. The first one is the tariffs, and the second one is access to temporary foreign workers. How do we get access to cheap labor? And by the way, their priority of the tariffs, when people claim that, oh, it's, countries that are paying for the imports and exports. Well, that is not actually the case, because when you look at the statistics, when you look at the actual standing of tariffs and who actually pays for it, it generates downward. So when inventory comes in from a certain country, the cost eventually comes down to you to pay for the tariff. And I know that sounds kind of crazy. Like, why would I pay for something for a company to bring in product from another country? But the same goes with taxes. The same goes with the carbon tax. They keep saying that it's only the top percent that has to pay for carbon taxes, but that's a domino effect, because that top company is going to pass on that cost to the next person, and it continues that chain, that cycle that just keeps going downward. That eventually, if say a grocery store has to pay carbon taxes because the trucker that's bringing in inventory is paying carbon taxes, and then you have to pay carbon taxes on fuel and whatnot, then the cost of the burden goes on to you. And they just raise the prices. So that's why tariffs are bad for people, and also why this whole rhetoric of worrying about the tariffs and worrying about the access to temporary foreign workers is a double exposure of how they're screwing the Canadian population, how they're screwing the Canadian workforce. Because if they really cared about the tariffs, they would actually do something to resort to Mark Carney to say, hey, we need to put an end to these tariffs, come to negotiations, and hey, let's actually stop the unnecessary carbon taxes that's also putting a burden onto people and make things more affordable. But they're not doing that. They're not doing that. They're just trying to find a way to put the burden onto you and screw everyone else, but keeping themselves isolated and safe. And saying that, oh, we're the ones that are experiencing the problems. We don't have access to cheap labor. You don't have access to cheap labor. That's their top priority, according to Mark Carney here. So here's Mario Zelia. He pointed this out. It says, Tim Hortons can't find a single Canadian that could work $36.60 an hour. I think anyone could work there. Anyone would love to have a $36 job an hour. So they need to import someone from another country to run a store they've never heard of. LMIA is a scam. This program is a cancer on Canadians looking for employment and a betrayal to all of us. And this is from the Government of Canada website. This is from their job bank. And notice, I caught this when I looked at this post. You notice how it says under restaurant manager, posted on July 17, 2025, by a licensed third party for Tim Hortons. So it's not Tim Hortons themselves putting this ad in the Canadian Job Bank. It's a third party organization is offering a job to a temporary foreign worker on behalf of Tim Hortons. So they claim. It's not Tim Hortons directly reaching out to these workers. They're going through a third-party system that's posting on the Government of Canada Job Bank website to reach out for cheap labor. Because apparently no one's willing to work for $36 an hour. I think if you go to the main streets of any Canadian town, they'd be more than happy to take that job. More than happy. But of course, they want temporary foreign workers because they know that, hey, even though I'm promising them $36 an hour and 60 cents, I don't have to pay them that much because they're illegal. They're not a Canadian resident. And I also get money back from the government. I get subsidized for screwing over a potential Canadian worker. And here to also explain this, here's this. It says how the TWS and the CEWS work together. The Canadian Emergency Wages Subsidy provides a subsidy of 75% of employee wages paid by an eligible employer up to a maximum of $847 per week for each eligible employee. So this is how companies are exploiting the Canadian workforce to get cheap labor so they don't have to pay them a decent wage. And in the process, because they're doing it, they're getting subsidized by the government. 75%. They get a payout from the government to use cheap labor, to make falsified documents that no one wants to work, and they have to resort to someone outside the country. They're getting money from the government, subsidies, through the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy to do this. Unbelievable. So, here's another example of this that I want to bring to attention. This is Frank Dominic, who's, I believe he's based in Toronto. And he did this little breakdown here. I don't really follow much of him. I've seen him a few times on TikTok. But here's him doing a breakdown about Subway. So apparently there was a job posting at Subway that was willing to pay $37 an hour. And they claimed that no one was willing to work at Subway for that money, which is kind of ridiculous. And he's going to explain why exactly they made fraudulent claims to exploit this job posting, exploit Canadian workers. Watch.
I made a video yesterday about how a Subway Sandwiches in small town Ontario was trying to apply for a temporary foreign worker to fill a assistant manager position at $37 an hour, which is about $67,000 per year. And I think we need to really clarify something here, because a lot of people who I would never want to be associated with said some pretty heinous things in my comments section. You hate temporary foreign workers because you're racist. I hate the temporary foreign worker program because it exploits both the temporary foreign worker and Canadians. You hate it because you say that all the people are coming from the same country. I hate it because I know that the people that are coming from whatever country they're coming from are being abused by this system. They are being tricked by recruiters in their domestic country to pay an upfront fee to then come and apply for these jobs and then not get actually paid as much as they are posting it for. That has been the scam that's been going on for the last few years. And yes, the federal government is cracking down on it. There is no way that this job will get approved. But you need to understand that the scam that is happening here is affecting both the people who are coming to Canada and Canadians. Yes, Canadians are losing jobs to programs like this. And yeah, that shouldn't be happening. But for you to then turn around and to be racist and make comments about the person who is coming here, that person is also a victim in this. They are also being abused by the system. They're not going to make the salary that it's actually been posted for. They're going to come here, they're going to live in some slumlord's basement, sharing a room with 5 other people, and they're going to be assaulted by racists like you. Corporations like bringing in temporary foreign workers because it allows them to suppress wages for domestic Canadians. Because in our late-stage capitalist society, the only way for companies to perform better every year is to squeeze more money out of their employees and out of consumers. Which means that this fight is not left or right. It's not about newcomers versus domestic Canadians. It's about a top-down battle. We should be feeling bad for the people who are being brought into Canada to work these jobs because they are being put in horrific conditions. We should also feel bad about young Canadians and other Canadians who are struggling to find work because the people who have the power are trying to manipulate the system to not hire Canadians and pay them what they are worth. I have been talking about my issues with international students and temporary foreign workers for well over a year now. This is not a race issue. It has never been a race issue. And if you make it a race issue, get the hell off my page.
So it's hard not to argue with that, because every point he makes, other than the fact that thinking that the federal government's going to do something about it, obviously we're not going to see really much improvements. I mean, the same companies that have been explaining this for years are the same companies that buy into politicians, that got Mark Carney elected, that funnel the campaigns of all the legislators. They're going to peddle around. They're going to make laws in favor of them. They're going to push the boundaries to bring in more migrants. I mean, look what friggin' Doug Ford gave amnesty to foreign temporary workers in the midst of an unemployment crisis within his own province. And that's on behest of the companies that are still continuing to fund him. They're still continuing to fund his thrall of being the Premier of Ontario. So, other than the fact that he thinks there's going to be accountability, which it's not going to come from politicians, it's going to come from us. He's right. He's right. And I agree with it 100%. That this is not a race issue. This is not me ranting about, oh, these newcomers that just come out of nowhere and they're coming from India and Arabs and rah, rah, rah. That's not what this is about. This is about the exploitation of corporations, the exploitation of the system that allows this to happen. The reason we have a mass migration crisis, the reason why immigration is the disaster it is right now, is largely because of this, largely because of these programs that have taken over our basic political structure and our basic common sense of having a merit-based immigration system, that we have accountability, that we have Canadians working in Canadian facilities, that we can employ Canadians. The whole reason we're in this mess right now is because of programs like this. And they need to be called out. They need to be stopped. They need to be held accountable. These companies that are, dangling a carrot in front of your nose thinking that, oh, we're going to pay, $37 for an assistant manager position at Subway. Oh, but we're only looking for temporary foreign workers. Why? Because they were never going to pay $37 for an assistant manager position at Subway. Come on. It's Subway. But they will dangle that in front of a newcomer who does not understand how exploitive this is. They're going to exploit it to their face. And they're going to bring them in. They're going to try and give them, sponsorship and pretend to, be on their side and blah, blah, blah. And take over that position. So it undermines the Canadian worker. It undermines them. And all it is benefit for the private establishment. All it does is benefit the private equity, firms that pretty much own a lot of these, chain stores, which is why they're only hiring temporary foreign workers. Like I've been saying, Tim Hortons is not a Canadian company. Tim Hortons has been bought out by a Brazilian private equity firm. And the reason why things are going so downhill, particularly with Tim Hortons, but elsewhere, is because they are cutting costs at every point in turn so they get high value for their investment, while it screws over the brand name, while it screws over the actual essence of these companies. There's a reason why, really I just stopped, even bothering with a lot of these chains. I don't even bother really going to Tim Hortons anymore. I don't bother drinking their coffee because it's just gone so downhill. There's not even a point to it. And it's not because of, migrant workers. It's not because of, there's an Indian behind the counter. It's because private equity firms and post-stage capitalism has destroyed a lot of these entities that we know and loved and become part of this Canadian identity that has screwed over the country and continues to do so. So I hope something does get done, but I have this hunch that it's not going to be through politics. Even with Pierre Poilievre stating what he said there, it really comes down to us. Really comes down to us.